The girl in the faded blue gown stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, certain every eye could see through her like glass. Eleanor Harper had known it was a mistake the moment she'd pulled her late sister's dress from the back of the closet. The fabric had been beautiful once, layers of cornflower silk with delicate beading along the bodice, but that had been 15 years ago when Charlotte had worn it to her college formal. The hem had been let down twice, the waist taken in with visible stitching, and the neckline sat awkwardly on Eleanor's narrower shoulders. Still, it was the only formal gown in the apartment, and when the cream-colored invitation had arrived 3 days ago, she had had no choice but to make do. The invitation itself had been strange. Eleanor worked as a research assistant at the city library, cataloging old municipal records for $8 an hour. She lived in a studio above a dry cleaner, ate pasta 4 nights a week, and owned exactly 2 pairs of shoes that weren't held together with superglue. Lavish masquerade balls thrown at the Valmont estate were not part of her world, yet there it had been. Her name written in genuine ink across heavy cardstock, requesting her presence at the annual autumn masquerade. No explanation, no sender's name, just the date and time and a small note at the bottom that read, "Formal attire required, mask provided at entry." She'd asked everyone at work if they'd received one too. They hadn't. Mrs. Chen, who'd worked in the archives for 40 years, had laughed and said the Valmont balls were legendary, invitation-only affairs where the city's elite mingled with people so wealthy they made the mayor look middle class. Eleanor should absolutely go, Mrs. Chen had insisted. It might be a clerical error, but what an adventure. Now, standing in the marble-floored entryway with her mask tied carefully over her face and Charlotte's old dress hanging loose at her waist, Eleanor knew exactly what kind of adventure this was going to be. "Oh my God," a voice rang out from a cluster of women near the grand staircase. Did she make that herself? Eleanor's cheeks burned beneath the simple black mask the doorman had handed her. Around her, the other guests wore gowns that cost more than her annual salary, all jewel tones and modern cuts with fabric that moved like water. The men were in tailored tuxedos, their masks ranging from simple black silk to elaborate creations adorned with feathers and gold leaf. She took a step toward the coat check, thinking she could leave her thin jacket and then slip back out the front door before anyone else noticed. "Wait, I know that dress," another voice said, louder this time. "That's Charlotte Harper's dress, from the Gamma Formal in, 2009? Eleanor's feet stopped moving. She turned slightly and saw 3 women staring at her, their faces partially hidden by glittering masks, but their expressions clear enough. Recognition and delight, the particular kind that came right before cruelty. "Eleanor Harper," the first woman said, and Eleanor recognized her now. Vanessa something. She'd been in Charlotte's sorority. "I didn't know you were still in town. How sweet that you kept Charlotte's old things." "It's vintage," Eleanor said quietly, though she knew it was useless. The dress wasn't vintage, it was outdated, and everyone in the entryway could see the difference. "Of course it is," Vanessa said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "How very sustainable of you." The other women laughed, and the sound carried across the marble floors. More heads turned. Eleanor felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders until she wanted to fold in on herself entirely. She should leave. She should absolutely leave. But her feet stayed planted on the cold floor, some stubborn part of her refusing to run. Charlotte had loved this dress. She'd worn it the night she'd met her future husband, had danced until dawn, and come home with her shoes in her hand and her face glowing with joy. She'd died 2 years later, a brain aneurysm in the middle of her morning run, and Eleanor had kept the dress because it was proof that her sister had been happy once, proof that their family had known lightness before the grief. "Eleanor," Vanessa said, stepping closer, "did you actually think you'd fit in here? This event is for the city's elite. The Valmonts have hosted this masquerade for 200 years. It's not—" "Is there a problem?" The voice cut through Vanessa's words like a blade through silk, quiet but absolute. The entire entryway went silent. Eleanor looked up and forgot how to breathe. The man descending the grand staircase was the most striking person she had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of posture that suggested he'd never slouched in his life. His hair was pure white, not the white of age but of snow in moonlight, falling to his shoulders in a straight, heavy curtain. His skin was equally pale, luminous in the warm light of the chandeliers, and his features were sharp and elegant, all high cheekbones and a strong jaw. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been painted on, and his mask was a simple thing of black silk that somehow made him look even more regal. But it was his eyes that held her. Even from across the entryway, even through the mask, she could see they were unusual, dark red like wine held up to firelight. He moved down the stairs with fluid grace, and the crowd parted before him without seeming to realize they were doing it. His gaze was fixed on Eleanor, and she felt pinned in place, a butterfly under glass. "Lord Valmont," Vanessa stammered, and Eleanor's stomach dropped. This was their host. This was the owner of the estate, the man who'd somehow invited her to this disaster of an evening. "I asked if there was a problem," he repeated, coming to a stop directly in front of Eleanor. Up close, he was even more imposing, and impossibly beautiful. "No, my lord," Vanessa said quickly. "We were just greeting an old acquaintance." "I see." His voice was cultured, with the faint trace of an accent Eleanor couldn't quite place. European, maybe, or simply old-fashioned. "And does your greeting typically involve mockery, Miss Ashford?" Vanessa paled. "I wasn't." "You were." He didn't raise his voice, didn't change his tone at all, but Vanessa flinched as if he'd shouted. "You commented on this young woman's dress, loudly enough for half the entryway to hear, with the clear intent of causing her embarrassment." "The dress is," Vanessa started. "The dress is beautiful," he said, and finally he looked away from Vanessa and turned his full attention to Eleanor. His red eyes swept over her, taking in the faded silk, the visible repairs, the way the gown hung slightly too loose on her frame. Eleanor wanted to disappear. "It has history, character. Unlike these modern creations that all look identical, this gown has been worn, lived in, loved. It tells a story." Eleanor's throat was tight. She managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. "What is your name?" he asked, and his tone had gentled, gone warm in a way that made her chest ache. "Eleanor Harper," she whispered. "Eleanor." He said it like he was tasting the word, rolling it around to see how it fit. Then he held out his hand, palm up, an old-fashioned gesture of invitation. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me into the ballroom? I believe the dancing's about to begin, and I find I'm not interested in spending the evening with anyone else." The entryway was utterly silent. Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, pale and elegant and steady, and couldn't quite process what was happening. "My lord, surely," Vanessa tried again. "You're no longer welcome at this event, Miss Ashford," he said without looking at her. "You and your companions may leave. If I discover you've attended any future gathering at this estate without express written invitation, you'll be barred from the property permanently." One of Vanessa's friends made a choked sound. Vanessa herself had gone white as paper. "You can't," she breathed. "I can." Now he did look at her, and Eleanor saw something cold and ancient move behind his eyes. "This is my home, these are my guests, and I will not tolerate cruelty under my roof. Leave, now." Vanessa and her friends fled, their heels clicking frantically against the marble. The crowd watched them go, then turned back to stare at Eleanor and the man who'd just defended her in front of everyone. Lord Valmont's attention returned to Eleanor, and the coldness vanished from his expression as if it had never been. "Please," he said softly, "I would very much like the honor of your company this evening, if you're willing to give it." Eleanor looked at his hand, then at his face, trying to understand what was happening. This didn't make sense. He was clearly wealthy beyond measure, powerful, important. She was nobody. She was wearing a dead woman's dress and didn't belong here. But he was waiting, patient and still, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost hopeful. Eleanor placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite his pale skin, and he smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less like a marble statue and more like a man. "Shall we?" he said, and led her toward the ballroom. The space beyond the entryway was breathtaking. The ballroom was enormous, all vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers with tall windows that looked out over grounds lit by what seemed like 1,000 lanterns. An orchestra played in one corner, something classical and sweeping, and the floor was filled with couples already dancing. Eleanor barely took it in. She was too aware of the man beside her, of his hand holding hers, of the way everyone in the room turned to watch them enter. "You're staring," Lord Valmont murmured, and she realized he was right. Every eye in the ballroom was on them. "They're staring at me," Eleanor corrected, "because I don't belong here. They're staring at you because I just crossed an entire ballroom to claim your attention," he said, "and because you are, without question, the most genuinely beautiful woman in this room." Eleanor stumbled. He caught her easily, his other hand coming to her waist to steady her. "I'm sorry," she gasped. I'm not good at this, at any of this." "Good at what? Walking?" His tone was gently teasing. "Shall I carry you?" At being here, at fancy parties and dancing and—" She gestured helplessly at the ballroom, the gowns, the glittering crowd. "I don't know why I was invited. I think someone made a mistake." "There was no mistake," he said, and something in his voice made her look up at him sharply. He met her gaze steadily. "I sent your invitation personally, Miss Harper." The world tilted. "Why?" "Because I wanted to meet you," he said simply. "I've seen you at the library. You work in the archives, cataloging the old city records." Eleanor stared at him. "You've been to the public library?" "Many times. I have an interest in local history." He paused. "And, more recently, an interest in the woman who handles those records with such obvious care." Her heart was doing something complicated and painful in her chest. "You invited me because you saw me at work?" "I invited you because every time I visited the archives you were kind," he said. "You helped an elderly man find his father's death certificate so he could settle an estate. You stayed late to help a graduate student locate property records for her thesis. You treated every person who walked through that door like they mattered, regardless of whether they could do anything for you in return." He drew her closer, positioning them for a waltz. "That's rare. You're rare. I wanted to know you." The music swelled, and he began to move, leading her into the dance. Eleanor followed clumsily, her mind spinning. "I'm nobody," she said again, helplessly. I'm a research assistant. I make barely enough to cover rent. I wore a dead woman's dress because I couldn't afford anything else." His hand tightened on her waist, not painfully, but firmly. "That dress belonged to someone you loved." "My sister. She died 2 years ago." "And you kept her dress, wore it tonight, even knowing it was out of style because it mattered to you, because she mattered to you." He spun her gently, and she realized she was moving more smoothly now, following his lead without thinking about it. "That's not nothing, Eleanor. That's everything." She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You don't know me." "Not yet," he agreed, "but I'd like to, if you'll allow it." They danced in silence for a moment, moving across the floor while the other couples gave them space. Eleanor could feel the weight of all those stares, but somehow it mattered less now. This man, this impossible, beautiful man, had chosen her, had seen her at her most ordinary and decided she was worth knowing. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Your real name, I mean. Everyone keeps calling you Lord Valmont." He smiled, that same transformative expression that made him look almost boyish. "Gideon," he said. "Gideon Xanthos. Valmont is the estate's name. It became attached to my family line several generations ago." "Gideon?" she repeated and liked the way it sounded, strong, old-fashioned in a way that suited him. "Thank you for what you did, in the entryway. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said, and there was steel beneath the warmth in his voice. "No one treats my guests with disrespect, especially not guests I personally invited." His eyes met hers. "And especially not you." Eleanor's breath caught. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time. "Because you're kind," he said. "Because you're genuine. Because in a world full of people who wear masks even when their faces are bare, you're exactly who you appear to be." He spun her again, and she found herself laughing, breathless and dizzy. "And because when I saw you standing in that entryway, wearing your sister's dress and refusing to run even though you wanted to, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen." The song ended. Gideon drew her to a stop, but he didn't release her hand. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her through a side door, away from the ballroom and down a hallway lined with portraits. Eleanor glanced at the paintings as they passed, noticing that many of the subjects had the same pale hair and skin as Gideon, the same red-tinted eyes. "Your family?" she asked. "Yes. The Xanthos line is old. We've held this estate for centuries." Something about the way he said it made Eleanor pause. How old is old? Gideon glanced at her, and she saw something flicker across his face. Calculation, maybe, or caution. "Very old," he said finally. "Old enough that some of our customs seem strange to outsiders. Like hosting elaborate masquerade balls? Like that, yes." He pushed open a door at the end of the hallway, revealing a library that made Eleanor's breath catch. The room was 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with books, with a spiral staircase leading to a second-floor gallery. A fire crackled in an enormous fireplace, and deep leather chairs were scattered throughout the space. "Oh," Eleanor breathed, stepping inside. "This is beautiful. I thought you might appreciate it." Gideon moved to one of the shelves, running his fingers along the spines. "These are the city records, the originals. The ones in the public library are copies. When the city hall burned in 1847, my family recovered what we could and had reproductions made for public use." Eleanor moved closer, staring at the ancient leather-bound volumes. "Why keep the originals?" "Because history matters. Because these books contain the real story of this city, unedited and uncensored. Birth records, death records, property transfers, trial transcripts, all of it." He pulled one down and handed it to her carefully. "This one lists every resident of the city in 1823, including my family." Eleanor opened the book, handling it with the care she'd learned in the archives. The pages were yellowed but intact, the handwriting cramped and old-fashioned. She flipped through, scanning names, and then stopped. "Gideon Xanthos," she read aloud, "resident of Valmont Estate, born 1789. She looked up at him, confused. "That can't be right. This would make you 237 years old," Gideon finished quietly. "Yes." Eleanor laughed because it was absurd, except Gideon wasn't laughing. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between apprehension and resignation. "That's impossible," she said. "Is it?" He moved closer, and in the firelight she could see how pale he really was, how perfect his skin was, not a single blemish or sign of age. "Look at me, Eleanor. Really look." She did. She looked at his red eyes, his white hair, his too pale skin. She thought about the way he moved, fluid and graceful, inhuman in its precision, the way he'd descended the staircase earlier, like he weighed nothing at all, the way the crowd had parted before him, instinctive and immediate, like prey before a predator. "You're a vampire," she whispered. Gideon nodded slowly. "Yes." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She set the book down carefully on a nearby table, then took 3 steps backward. "That's not real. Vampires aren't real. We are. We're simply very good at staying hidden." He didn't move toward her, didn't try to close the distance. "The masquerade tonight isn't just a ball, Eleanor. It's a political summit. Every major vampire family on the East Coast sends representatives. We gather, we negotiate, we maintain the peace between our various houses." "Vampire families," Eleanor repeated faintly. "Clans, dynasties, courts, the terminology varies." Gideon's voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "The Xanthos line is one of the oldest. I'm the patriarch, which means I have certain responsibilities, hosting events like this, mediating disputes, ensuring that our existence remains secret from the human world." Eleanor's legs felt weak. She sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind racing. "Why tell me, if it's such a secret?" "Because I want you to know me," Gideon said. "The real me, not the mask I wear for the human world." He moved closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "And because I wanted you here tonight, genuinely invited, not as food or entertainment, but as a guest, as someone I hope to know better. You deserve to understand what you were walking into." "Food," Eleanor echoed, and felt her stomach turn. "You drink blood." "Yes, but not from the unwilling, and never fatally. We have donors, humans who provide for us in exchange for money or protection or other considerations. His jaw tightened. I won't pretend we're harmless, Eleanor. We're predators. But we're not monsters, not all of us. We're simply trying to survive in a world that would destroy us if it knew we existed. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face, trying to process everything. Vampires, real, actual vampires. And Gideon was one of them. Gideon, who'd crossed an entire ballroom to defend her, who'd sent her an invitation because he'd seen her being kind to library patrons, who was looking at her now like her opinion was the most important thing in the world. I should be terrified, she said finally, lowering her hands. You should, Gideon agreed. I'm dangerous, Eleanor. My kind are dangerous. Everything you've ever heard in stories or movies, most of it has some basis in truth. But I'm not. She looked up at him, really looked, and realized it was true. She wasn't afraid. Overwhelmed, yes. Confused, absolutely. But not afraid. Why aren't I afraid of you? I don't know. Gideon's voice had gone soft, wondering. You should be running. Most humans do when they learn the truth. Most humans probably don't have a vampire lord call them the fairest in the room, Eleanor said, and was surprised to hear a trace of humor in her own voice. That's a pretty effective distraction from the whole blood-drinking thing. Gideon laughed, the sound startled out of him. You're remarkable. I'm wearing a dead woman's dress and having a conversation with a vampire, Eleanor said. I'm not sure remarkable is the word for it. I am. Gideon moved closer, then crouched in front of her chair so they were at eye level. Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What I did tonight in the entryway, publicly favoring an unknown human woman at a political summit, that was not a small thing. There will be consequences, questions. Some of my guests will be insulted that I didn't greet them first, that I gave you my attention instead. Eleanor's brief spark of humor died. I'm causing you problems. No, Gideon said firmly. They're causing problems by expecting me to prioritize politics over basic decency. Over you. His hand moved like he wanted to touch her face, then fell back to his side. But you need to know what you're walking into. If you stay tonight, if you let me continue to court you. Court me? Eleanor interrupted. Yes, court you. What did you think this was? Gideon looked genuinely confused. I invited you to my home. I declared in front of 100 witnesses that you were the most beautiful woman present. I threw out 3 guests for insulting you. Eleanor, I'm courting you. Rather publicly, actually. Eleanor's head spun. We just met. I've been visiting the library for 3 months, Gideon said, watching you work, listening to you talk to patrons, learning who you are, and tonight when you walked in wearing that dress, refusing to be ashamed even though they all wanted you to be. He stopped, shook his head. I've lived for more than 2 centuries, Eleanor. I've met thousands of people. You're the first one in decades who's made me feel anything real. That's insane, Eleanor managed. Probably, Gideon agreed. But it's true. He sat back on his heels, giving her space. If you want to leave, I'll have my driver take you home. No judgment, no hard feelings. You'll never see me again if that's what you prefer. And if I stay? Then you stay as my guest. I'll introduce you to the people who matter, the ones who won't judge you for your dress or your income. We'll dance, we'll talk, and at the end of the night, I'll ask if I can see you again. His red eyes were steady on hers. And tomorrow, the entire vampire community on the East Coast will know that Gideon Xanthos is courting a human woman. That will complicate things. Some will be curious. Some will be hostile. Some will see you as a weakness they can exploit. Eleanor's throat was dry. You're really selling this. Yeah, I'm being honest. Gideon's voice was gentle. You deserve honesty. You deserve to make an informed choice. So I'm telling you the risks because I won't lie to you. Not now. Not ever. Eleanor thought about the invitation, appearing out of nowhere. About Vanessa's cruel smile and the way the crowd had turned to stare. About Gideon descending the staircase like something out of a dream, defending her to people who could probably destroy her with a word. She thought about Charlotte, who'd loved this dress, who'd danced until dawn and fallen in love and died too young, who'd always told Eleanor to take chances, to be brave, to say yes to things that scared her. I'll stay, Eleanor said. Gideon's face lit up. You're sure? No, Eleanor admitted. I'm not sure about anything right now except that I want to know what happens next. Then let's find out together. Gideon stood, offering her his hand again. Eleanor took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They returned to the ballroom together. The dancing had continued in their absence, but Eleanor could feel the shift in atmosphere the moment they entered. Conversations paused, heads turned. A woman near the door whispered something to her companion, and they both looked directly at Eleanor. "Ignore them," Gideon murmured. "Most of them are just curious, and a few are envious, which is their problem, not yours." He led her to a small group standing near the orchestra. There were 4 of them, all with the same pale hair and skin as Gideon, all watching Eleanor with unreadable expressions. "Eleanor Harper, allow me to introduce some members of my household," Gideon said. "This is Lucian, my cousin and the estate's steward. Beside him is Isolde, another cousin, and her husband, Marcus. And this is Theron, who's been with my family for nearly as long as I have." Eleanor nodded to each of them, trying not to stare. They were all stunning, inhumanly beautiful, and they all had that same quality of stillness that Gideon had, like they were statues that had learned to move. "Miss Harper," Lucian said, inclining his head. His voice was smooth, cultured. "Welcome to Valmont Estate. We've heard much about you." "You have?" Eleanor glanced at Gideon, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Gideon has mentioned you several times," Isolde said, and there was warmth in her tone. "He said you had a gift for making people feel valued. I can see he wasn't exaggerating." "I just do my job," Eleanor said awkwardly. "You do it with care," Theron said. He was older than the others, or looked older at least, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd been turned later in life. "That's rare, especially in a world that rarely rewards care." Marcus, who hadn't spoken yet, gave Eleanor a small smile. "My wife has been trying to convince Gideon to invite you for weeks. She's pleased he finally grew a spine about it." Gideon shot Marcus a look, but there was no real heat in it. "I was waiting for the right moment." "You were being cautious," Isolde corrected, "which is fine, but I'm glad you finally did something." She turned to Eleanor. "Has he explained about tonight? About what this gathering really is?" "He told me about the summit," Eleanor said carefully, "and about everything else." Isolde exchanged a glance with Lucian. "That must have been quite a conversation." "It was memorable," Eleanor said, which made Theron laugh. "I like her," Theron declared. "She has composure. That's good. You'll need it." "Need it for what?" Eleanor asked. Before anyone could answer, the orchestra finished their piece and a woman's voice rang out across the ballroom. "Lord Xanthus, a word?" Gideon's entire body went rigid. Eleanor looked past him and saw a woman approaching, and even among a room full of unnaturally beautiful vampires, this woman stood out. She was tall, model thin, with white hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist. Her gown was deep crimson, cut to show off her figure, and she moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing everyone was watching her. "Lady Seraphine," Gideon said, and his voice had gone cold. "I'm occupied at the moment." "I can see that." Seraphine's eyes flicked to Eleanor, dismissive and sharp. "How charming! You found a pet." Eleanor felt Gideon's hand tighten on hers, his grip just shy of painful. "Miss Harper is my guest," Gideon said, each word precise and cutting. "You will address her with respect or not at all." Seraphine's smile was all teeth. "Of course. Forgive me, Miss Harper. I didn't realize you were anyone of importance." She turned back to Gideon. "We need to discuss the alliance between our houses. You've been avoiding me all evening." "I've been entertaining my guests," Gideon said, "as a host should." "You've been entertaining one guest," Seraphine corrected, "to the exclusion of everyone else. People are starting to talk, Gideon. Let them talk. You can't afford to be cavalier about this." Seraphine moved closer, and Eleanor saw calculation in her red eyes. "Your position isn't as secure as you'd like to think. The other houses are watching. If you appear weak, distracted—" "I appear exactly as I intend to appear," Gideon interrupted, "strong enough to do as I please without seeking permission from you or anyone else." Seraphine's expression flickered, something ugly moving beneath the surface. "We have an agreement, Gideon. Our families have been negotiating for months." "We have no agreement," Gideon said flatly. "We have had discussions which, as of tonight, are concluded." The ballroom had gone very quiet. Eleanor realized that everyone was listening, even the couples still pretending to dance. Concluded, Seraphine repeated, and her voice had dropped to something dangerous, just like that. Just like that. Because of her? Seraphine's gaze raked over Eleanor again, and this time there was open hostility in her expression. Because of some human girl in a second-hand dress? Because I choose to conclude them, Gideon said. Eleanor has nothing to do with it. That was a lie, Eleanor realized. She had everything to do with it. Whatever agreement Gideon and Seraphine had been discussing, whatever alliance was on the table, he was walking away from it. Because of Eleanor. Because he'd invited her here and didn't want to pretend otherwise. You're making a mistake, Seraphine said, and there was warning in her tone. My family won't forget this insult. Then they're welcome to take it up with me directly, Gideon said. But not tonight. Tonight you're leaving my estate immediately. Seraphine went still. You're throwing me out? You called my guest a pet, Gideon said, and his voice had gone very soft, very dangerous. You disrespected her in my home, at an event to which you were invited as a gesture of goodwill. Yes, Lady Seraphine, I'm throwing you out. For a moment, Eleanor thought Seraphine might attack. The vampire woman's face had gone sheet white with fury, her hands curling into claws at her sides. Then Lucian stepped forward, positioning himself between Seraphine and Gideon, and Theron moved to flank him. You should go, Lucian said quietly, before this becomes more unpleasant than it already is. Seraphine's eyes blazed. She looked at Gideon, then at Eleanor, and her expression promised violence. This isn't over, she said. Yes, Gideon replied. It is. Seraphine turned and stalked toward the exit, her crimson gown billowing behind her. The crowd parted silently, and Eleanor watched her disappear through the ballroom doors. The silence stretched for another heartbeat, 2. Then the orchestra started playing again, and conversation resumed, though it was more muted now, more cautious. Gideon looked down at Eleanor. I'm sorry you had to see that. What was she talking about? Eleanor asked. What alliance? Gideon exchanged a glance with Lucian, who nodded slightly. Come, Gideon said. Let's find somewhere quieter to talk. He led her to a small sitting room off the ballroom, this one decorated in deep blues and silvers. Isolde and Marcus followed, and Lucian closed the door behind them. Seraphine is the eldest daughter of the Corvain family, Gideon said once they were all seated. They're one of the most powerful vampire houses in the region, second only to my own line. For the last 6 months, they've been pushing for a marriage alliance between our families. Eleanor's stomach dropped. A marriage alliance between you and her? Yes. Were you considering it? I was listening to the proposal, Gideon said carefully, because refusing outright would have been seen as an insult, and I didn't want to start a war over it, but I had no intention of accepting. Even before I met you, I had no intention of accepting. Why not? Eleanor asked. If it would secure peace between your families. Because I won't marry someone I don't love, Gideon said simply. I've lived too long, seen too much, to settle for a political arrangement. I'd rather deal with the consequences of refusal than spend centuries with someone I can barely tolerate. He's been putting off giving them a final answer for weeks, Isolde added. The Corvains have been getting impatient. And now they have their answer, Marcus said, quite publicly. Gideon rubbed his face. I didn't plan to do it this way, but when Seraphine called Eleanor a pet, he broke off, shaking his head. I couldn't let that stand. So you humiliated her in front of everyone, Lucian said, which means the Corvains will retaliate. The question is how. Eleanor felt cold. Retaliate against who? Gideon? You, Lucian said, not unkindly. You're the reason he rejected Seraphine. You're vulnerable, human, unprotected. If they want to punish Gideon, hurting you is the most efficient method. Then I'll leave, Eleanor said immediately. I'll go home and Gideon can tell them it was a mistake. That he wasn't serious? No. Gideon's voice was flat, absolute. That won't work. The damage is done. And even if it weren't, I won't lie about you. I won't pretend you don't matter to me. Gideon, Lucian said, warning in his tone. No, Gideon repeated. I won't sacrifice her dignity to save myself political trouble. If the Corvains want to fight, they can have one, but Eleanor stays under my protection. For how long? Isolde asked quietly. A week? A month? Eventually she'll go home, Gideon. She has a life outside this estate. You can't keep her locked up here forever. Then we'll figure something else out, Gideon said stubbornly. Eleanor's head was spinning. This was insane. She'd been at the ball for barely 2 hours, and already she'd caused a political incident that might lead to violence against her, because a vampire lord had decided to court her. "I should go," she said again. "Do you want to go?" Gideon asked, and when she looked at him, his expression was open, vulnerable. "Or do you want to leave because you think it's safer? Because I'm telling you, Eleanor, leaving won't make you safe. The Corvains already know who you are. Leaving will just remove you from my protection." "Staying puts you in danger," Eleanor argued. "I'm always in danger. I'm the patriarch of one of the oldest vampire families in the country. There's always someone who wants my position, my power, my life." Gideon leaned forward. "But you, Eleanor, I don't want you in danger because of me. If you truly want to leave, want nothing more to do with me or this world, I'll respect that. But if you're only leaving because you think it's what I need, then please, reconsider." Eleanor looked around the room, at Isolde and Marcus watching her with sympathy, at Lucian's carefully neutral expression, at Gideon's desperate hope. She thought about Charlotte again, about taking chances, about the fact that she'd come here tonight knowing it was a mistake and doing it anyway because the alternative was spending another evening alone in her tiny apartment. "What happens if I stay?" she asked. "You stay as my guest for the remainder of the ball," Gideon said. "Tomorrow I'll assign you a guard, someone to watch over you when you're not here. We'll take precautions, and we'll figure out together what comes next." "A guard," Eleanor repeated. "Like a bodyguard?" "Yes. Theron has volunteered, actually. He's very good at his job. I'm being stalked by vampires, and I need a vampire bodyguard to protect me from them," Eleanor said. "This is my life now." "Only if you want it to be," Gideon said softly. Eleanor closed her eyes. This was insane. Absolutely, completely insane. She should run, should go home, quit her job, move to a different city where vampire politics couldn't reach her. But when she opened her eyes and saw Gideon watching her, patient and hopeful, and trying so hard not to push, she knew she wasn't going to do any of those things. "I want to stay," she said. "At least for tonight. I want to see what happens next." Gideon's smile could have lit the entire estate. "Then let's go back to the ball." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Gideon introduced Eleanor to what felt like dozens of people, all of them vampires, all of them watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and calculation. Some were kind, like an older vampire named Adrian, who told Eleanor she appreciated seeing Gideon happy. Some were coldly polite, like the pair of twins who assessed Eleanor like she was a museum piece they were considering purchasing. None of them were openly hostile, but Eleanor could feel the weight of their judgment. She danced with Gideon 3 more times, each dance easier than the last as she learned to follow his lead. They ate, or rather, Eleanor ate, while Gideon watched with amusement, because of course vampires didn't need food, and they talked about everything and nothing, books and history and the city they both lived in. It was nearly midnight when Seraphine's retaliation came. Eleanor had stepped away to use the restroom, declining Gideon's offer to wait outside for her because she needed a moment alone to process everything. She'd just finished washing her hands when the lights went out. "Hello, pet," Seraphine's voice said from the darkness. Eleanor's heart hammered. She backed toward where she remembered the door being, her hands outstretched. This isn't—" "You humiliated me," Seraphine continued, and Eleanor could hear her moving, circling. "You walked into my negotiation wearing a dead woman's dress and turned Gideon's head like some kind of cheap trick. Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" "I didn't mean to. I don't care what you meant." Seraphine's voice was closer now. "You're human. You're nothing. And yet Gideon threw away months of careful negotiation for you. Why?" "I don't know," Eleanor gasped. Her back hit the wall. Wrong direction? She'd gone the wrong direction. "Neither do I. But I'm going to find out." Something moved in the darkness, fast, and then Seraphine's hand was around Eleanor's throat, cold and strong. "After I'm done with you, after Gideon sees what's left, he'll understand. Humans don't belong in our world." Eleanor couldn't breathe. She clawed at Seraphine's hand, useless, ineffective. Black spots danced across her vision, then the door exploded inward, and light flooded the room. Seraphine hissed, her hand releasing Eleanor's throat, and Eleanor collapsed against the wall, gasping. Gideon stood in the doorway, and he looked like something out of a nightmare. His eyes were blazing red, his fangs fully visible, and the expression on his face was murder made flesh. "Get away from her," he said, and his voice was barely human. Seraphine moved, too fast for Eleanor to track, but Gideon was faster. He caught Seraphine mid-lunge and slammed her into the opposite wall hard enough to crack the tile. Seraphine snarled and tried to twist free, but Gideon's hand was at her throat now, pinning her in place. "You attacked my guest," Gideon said, each word dropping like a stone. "In my home, under my protection." "She's nothing," Seraphine spat. "She's everything." Gideon's grip tightened and Seraphine made a choked sound. "And you just signed your family's death warrant." "Gideon," Lucian said from the doorway, his voice urgent, "think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," Gideon said. "I'm thinking that Seraphine Corvain just attempted to murder a human under my protection at a diplomatic summit. That's a violation of every treaty we have." "Killing her won't solve anything," Lucian said. "It'll start a war." "Then we'll have a war." Gideon's eyes didn't leave Seraphine's face. "Because I will not tolerate this. I will not allow anyone to harm Eleanor and walk away unpunished." "Gideon, please," Eleanor managed, her voice hoarse. Don't start a war over me." Gideon's head snapped toward her, and some of the rage faded from his expression. "Eleanor, please," she repeated. "I'm okay. I'm fine. Just, please, don't kill her." For a long moment, Gideon didn't move. Then, very slowly, he released Seraphine. She crumpled to the floor, gasping. "You're banished," Gideon said coldly. "You and your entire family. You're barred from my territory, from any gathering I host, from any negotiation, any gathering I host, from any negotiation involving my house. If I see you again, I will kill you, treaty or no treaty." Seraphine looked up at him, hatred burning in her eyes. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Gideon said. "Lucian, have her escorted off the grounds. If she resists, you have my permission to use force." Lucian nodded and helped Seraphine to her feet. She shook him off, straightening her dress, and shot one last venomous look at Eleanor before allowing herself to be led away. The moment they were gone, Gideon was kneeling beside Eleanor, his hands gentle on her face. "Are you hurt? Did she let me see your neck?" "I'm fine," Eleanor said, though her throat ached where Seraphine had grabbed her. "She scared me more than anything." "I'm sorry." Gideon's voice was raw. "I should have kept you with me. I should have known she'd try something." "You can't watch me every second," Eleanor said. "That's not realistic." "Then I'll find a way to make it realistic." Gideon helped her stand, his hands steady on her arms. "Eleanor, I can't lose you. Not when I've only just found you." Eleanor looked at him, at this ancient, powerful being who was looking at her like she was something precious and fragile, and felt something shift in her chest. It was too fast, too much, too impossible, but it was real. "You're not going to lose me," she said softly. Gideon closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. "Promise me." "I promise." They stood there in the ruined bathroom, holding each other, while outside the masquerade continued without them. Gideon insisted on taking Eleanor home personally, despite her protests that she could get a cab. His driver brought the car around, a sleek black thing that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire apartment building, and Gideon settled beside her in the back seat. "I'm assigning Theron to you starting tomorrow," he said as they pulled away from the estate. "He'll be discreet, but he'll be there. Anytime you leave your apartment, anytime you're at work, he'll be watching." "For how long?" Eleanor asked. "Until I'm certain the threat has passed." Gideon's jaw was tight. "The Corvains won't let this go easily. Seraphine is proud, vindictive. She'll want revenge." "Against you or against me?" "Both, probably. But you're easier to reach, which makes you the more likely target." He took her hand. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want to walk away—" "I don't," Eleanor interrupted. "I mean, I'm terrified, obviously. But I don't want to walk away." Gideon looked at her searchingly. "Why not?" Eleanor thought about it, trying to find words for something she didn't fully understand herself. "Because tonight was the first time in 2 years that I felt like I was really living," she said finally. "Since Charlotte died, I've just been going through the motions. Work, home, sleep, repeat. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't happy either. I was just existing." She met his eyes. Tonight, even with everything that happened, I felt alive. I felt like I mattered. And I think that's worth being scared for. Gideon raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You do matter, Eleanor. More than you know. They reached her apartment building too soon. Gideon walked her to the door, standing close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. Can I see you tomorrow? He asked. Yes, Eleanor said immediately. When? Whenever you like. I'll come to you or you can come to the estate, whatever makes you comfortable. Eleanor smiled, surprised by how easy it was. Come here, I'll make dinner. I don't eat, Gideon reminded her gently. Then you can keep me company while I eat, Eleanor said. 7 o'clock? I'll be here. Gideon hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft and careful. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Gideon. She watched him return to the car, watched it pull away into the night, then climbed the stairs to her apartment. It looked exactly as she'd left it, small and shabby and familiar, but somehow it felt different now. She felt different. Eleanor changed out of Charlotte's dress, hanging it carefully in the closet, and climbed into bed. Sleep took a long time to come, her mind replaying every moment of the evening, Gideon's hand in hers, Seraphine's fury, the way Gideon had looked at her like she was worth starting a war over. She fell asleep thinking about red eyes and impossible promises. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find a text from a number she didn't recognize. Good morning, Miss Harper. This is Theron. I'm parked outside your building. Take your time, no rush. Eleanor leaned out her window and looked down at the street. Sure enough, there was a dark sedan parked across from her building, and through the windshield she could see a pale-haired figure in the driver's seat. She got ready for work, hyper-aware of the fact that she was being watched, and headed downstairs. Theron was waiting outside his car, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket that didn't quite hide the fact that he was built like a brick wall. Miss Harper, he said, nodding politely, I'll be following you to work. You won't see me during the day, but I'll be nearby. This is so weird, Eleanor muttered. Theron smiled slightly. You'll get used to it. She didn't get used to it. All day at work she was aware of Theron's presence somewhere nearby. She saw him once, standing at the end of the archives aisle, watching the entrance. When she looked again, he was gone. Mrs. Chen noticed something was different. You're jumpy today, she observed. Did something happen at that fancy party? You could say that, Eleanor said. She'd spent half the night trying to figure out what to tell people, how to explain Gideon without revealing what he really was. In the end, she'd settled on a version of the truth. I met someone, the host actually. He's interested. Mrs. Chen's face lit up. Eleanor Harper, are you telling me you have a boyfriend? I don't know what we are, Eleanor admitted. It's complicated. The good ones always are. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. Good for you, honey. It's about time you let yourself be happy again. At 6:30, Eleanor left work and walked home, Theron's sedan trailing her at a discreet distance. She stopped at the grocery store, bought ingredients for pasta and salad, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that she was making dinner for a vampire. At 6:55, there was a knock on her door. Eleanor checked the peephole, saw Gideon standing in the hallway holding a bouquet of flowers, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. She opened the door. Hi, Gideon said and offered her the flowers. They were beautiful, deep red roses mixed with white lilies. I wasn't sure what you'd like. They're perfect, Eleanor said, taking them. Come in, sorry about the mess. Her apartment wasn't actually messy, just small and obviously cheap. The furniture was second-hand, the walls were bare except for a few photos of Charlotte, and the kitchenette was barely big enough for one person. Eleanor was suddenly very aware of the contrast between this and Gideon's estate, but Gideon didn't seem to notice or care. He looked around with genuine interest, his attention catching on the photos. Is this your sister? Yeah, that was taken about a year before she died. Eleanor moved to stand beside him. The photo showed Charlotte at her wedding, laughing at something off-camera, her face full of joy. She was happy that day. She looks like you, Gideon observed. She was prettier. No, Gideon said firmly, you're both beautiful. But you have something she doesn't in this photo, a kind of quiet strength. She's radiating joy. But you're the kind of person who holds steady when everything else is falling apart. Eleanor's throat tightened. You don't know that. I do, actually. I've seen you do it. Last night when Seraphine attacked you, you were terrified, but you didn't fall apart. And afterward, you asked me not to kill her, even though she'd just tried to kill you. Gideon turned to face her fully. That's strength, Eleanor. Real strength. Eleanor looked away, not sure how to respond to that. I should check on the pasta. Dinner was strange and oddly domestic. Eleanor ate while Gideon sat across from her, asking questions about her work and her life with genuine interest. He told her more about the estate, about the politics of vampire society, about the weight of leading a house for centuries. Don't you get tired, Eleanor asked, living that long, dealing with the same problems over and over? Sometimes, Gideon admitted, there have been periods where I considered letting someone else take over, stepping back from the responsibility. But then something happens, some new crisis or opportunity, and I remember why I do this. Why do you do it? Because someone has to. Because if I walk away, the position goes to my cousin Marius, who's ambitious and cruel and would rule through fear rather than respect. Because I've built something here, a community that mostly works, and I don't want to see it destroyed. He paused. And because, until recently, I didn't have a reason to do anything else. Eleanor set down her fork. Until recently? Until you, Gideon said quietly. Until I met someone who makes me want to think about a future, instead of just managing the present. We barely know each other, Eleanor whispered. I know. And I'm not asking you to make any promises or decisions. I'm just telling you how I feel. Gideon reached across the table, offering his hand. Eleanor took it, his skin cool against her palm. I'm falling for you, Eleanor Harper. Probably too fast, definitely too hard, but I can't seem to help it. Eleanor's heart was racing. I think I'm falling for you too, which is insane because you're a vampire and I'm human, and this whole situation is impossible. Nothing's impossible, Gideon said. Difficult, yes. Complicated, absolutely. But not impossible. They talked until nearly midnight, when Gideon reluctantly said he needed to go. I have a council meeting tomorrow morning, he explained. Damage control from last night. The other houses want explanations for what happened with Seraphine. What will you tell them? Eleanor asked. The truth. That she attacked my guest and I responded accordingly. Gideon stood, pulling Eleanor up with him. They won't like it, but they'll accept it. Seraphine was in the wrong. Eleanor walked him to the door. Will I see you again soon? Tomorrow night, if you'll have me, Gideon said, and the night after that and the night after that for as long as you'll let me keep coming back. Eleanor went up on her toes and kissed him, quick and soft and brave. When she pulled back, Gideon was staring at her like she'd performed a miracle. I'll take that as a yes, he said, his voice rough. It's a yes, Eleanor confirmed. She watched him leave, then closed the door and leaned against it, touching her lips and smiling like an idiot. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and Gideon's visits. He came every evening, bringing flowers or books or simply himself, and they talked for hours. Sometimes Theron joined them, the vampire bodyguard proving to be surprisingly good company despite his intimidating appearance. Isolde visited once, bringing pastries and gossip from the estate, and even Lucian stopped by, ostensibly to check on Eleanor's safety, but really, she suspected, to assess whether she was worth all the trouble she was causing. Eleanor learned more about vampire society, about the complex web of alliances and feuds that governed their world. She learned that Gideon was respected, but not universally loved, that his refusal to rule through fear made some of the other houses see him as weak. She learned about the donors who supplied blood to the vampires, and about the strict laws that governed feeding. And she fell more in love with Gideon every day. It wasn't the big dramatic moments, though there were plenty of those. It was the small things, the way he listened when she talked about her day, the way he remembered details she'd mentioned in passing and brought them up weeks later, the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his very long life. 3 weeks after the masquerade, Eleanor came home from work to find Theron looking tense. What's wrong? She asked immediately. We have a problem, Theron said. The Corvains have been quiet since the masquerade. Too quiet. Gideon thinks they're planning something. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Planning what? We don't know, but you need to be more careful. Stay inside as much as possible, don't go anywhere alone, and if you see anyone suspicious, I'll call you immediately, Eleanor finished. I know the drill. But knowing the drill didn't make her feel any safer. That night, Gideon arrived looking grim. "I want you to stay at the estate," he said without preamble, "just for a few days until we figure out what the Corvains are planning." "I can't just leave my job," Eleanor protested. "Take a few days off. Call in sick. I don't care, Eleanor. I just need you somewhere I can protect you properly." Gideon took her hands. "Please, I have a bad feeling about this." Eleanor wanted to argue, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. She'd never seen Gideon afraid before, not even when Seraphine had attacked her. "Okay," she said. "Let me pack a bag." The estate felt different at night, emptier and more echoing. Gideon showed Eleanor to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment, with a four-poster bed and windows that looked out over the grounds. "I'm right down the hall," he said. "If you need anything at all, just call for me." Eleanor unpacked her small bag, changing into pajamas and brushing her teeth in the enormous ensuite bathroom. When she climbed into bed, the sheets were so soft she almost couldn't feel them. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion must have caught up with her because the next thing she knew she was blinking awake in darkness, her heart pounding. Someone was in the room. Eleanor opened her mouth to scream, but a cold hand clamped over it. "Quiet, pet," a familiar voice hissed, "or I'll kill you before anyone can reach us." Seraphine. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel Seraphine's presence, cold and malevolent in the darkness. "Did you really think Gideon could keep you safe?" Seraphine whispered. "This is my world, not yours. I've been walking through these halls for decades. I know every entrance, every secret passage, and I know how to make you disappear without leaving a trace." Eleanor tried to bite the hand over her mouth, but Seraphine just laughed. "Oh, you've got spirit. I'll give you that, but it won't help you." The hand lifted, and Eleanor drew breath to scream, but Seraphine was faster. Something sharp pricked Eleanor's neck, and warmth spread through her veins, thick and heavy. "What?" Eleanor managed, but her tongue felt too big for her mouth. "Sedative," Seraphine said. "Vampire venom, actually. Very effective on humans. You'll be unconscious in about 30 seconds. "Gideon will kill you," Eleanor slurred. "He'll have to find me first, and by the time he does, you'll be long dead." Seraphine stroked Eleanor's hair, mockingly gentle. "I'm going to drain you dry, pet, and then I'm going to leave your body where Gideon will find it, so he knows exactly what happens when he rejects my family." Eleanor tried to fight, to move, to do anything, but the venom was spreading fast. Her limbs felt like lead. The world was going dark. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was the sound of her door crashing open and Gideon's roar of fury. Eleanor woke in stages, her head pounding and her mouth dry. She was in the guest room still, she realized, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Gideon was sitting beside the bed holding her hand. "You're awake," he said, and his relief was palpable. "What happened?" Eleanor's voice came out as a croak. "Drink this first." Gideon helped her sit up, offering her a glass of water. She drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her raw throat. "Seraphine," Eleanor said once she could speak properly. "She was here. She said she was going to kill me." "She's not going to kill anyone," Gideon said, and there was something dark in his tone. "She's dead." Eleanor stared at him. "You killed her." "I did. The moment I realized she was in your room, there was no other option." Gideon's jaw was tight. "She broke into my home, into the room where you were sleeping, and tried to murder you. I warned her what would happen if I saw her again." "What about her family? Won't they? They've already sent word that they consider the matter closed," Gideon said. "Seraphine acted without their approval. They're not happy about her death, but they acknowledge that she brought it on herself by violating the terms of her banishment." Eleanor sagged back against the pillows. "This is never going to stop, is it? There's always going to be someone who sees me as a weakness, someone who wants to hurt you by hurting me." "No," Gideon said firmly. "This stops now. I'm going to make it clear to every house, every vampire on the East Coast, that you're under my permanent protection, that harming you means declaring war on me and mine. Most of them won't risk it. And the ones who will? I'll deal with them." Gideon lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Eleanor. Not now, not ever." Eleanor looked at him, this ancient, powerful being who'd killed to protect her, and felt something settle in her chest. This was real. He was real. Whatever was growing between them, it was worth fighting for. "I love you," she said. Gideon's eyes widened. "Eleanor, I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I love you, Gideon Xanthos. I think I've loved you since you came down those stairs and took my hand in front of everyone." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "So whatever happens next, whatever we have to face, I want to face it with you." Gideon made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something infinitely precious. "I love you too," he said into her hair. "God help me, Eleanor. I love you so much it terrifies me." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor moved into the estate officially, giving up her tiny apartment because Gideon refused to let her return to a place the Corvains might have marked. She took a new job in the estate's library, cataloging Gideon's collection of historical documents, and found that she was happier than she'd been in years. Theron became a constant presence, along with Isolde and Marcus and Lucian. The estate's household accepted her easily, these ancient vampires treating her with respect and warmth that still sometimes surprised her. And Gideon courted her properly, with all the old-fashioned formality of someone who'd lived through centuries. He brought her flowers, took her to concerts and museums, spent hours simply talking with her about everything and nothing. 6 months after the masquerade, Eleanor found herself standing in Gideon's private study, looking at a small velvet box he'd just placed in her hands. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside the box was a ring, a beautiful thing of silver and sapphires that looked like it belonged in a museum. Eleanor stared at it, her heart pounding. "It's been in my family for 300 years, Gideon said quietly. "Worn by the women who've chosen to join our line, to become part of our world permanently." Eleanor looked up at him. "You're asking me to turn?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. Not now, not immediately. But someday, if this is what you want, if I'm what you want, I'd like to offer you forever." Gideon took her hand. "I know it's a huge decision. I know what I'm asking you to give up. Your humanity, the sun, the life you might have had. But I'm offering you everything I have in return. My protection, my love, my eternity." Eleanor thought about Charlotte, about her sister's joy in that wedding photo. Charlotte had died at 32, her life cut short just when it should have been beginning. Eleanor was 26. If she stayed human, she'd have maybe 50 more years. 50 years with Gideon, watching him stay unchanging while she aged and weakened and eventually died. Or she could choose this, could choose forever. "Yes," Eleanor said. Gideon blinked. "Yes?" "Not right now," Eleanor clarified. "I want to wait, make sure this is really what I want, that we're really what I think we are. But yes, someday. If you still want me then." "I will always want you," Gideon said fiercely, and kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. A year after the masquerade, the estate hosted another ball. Eleanor stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the fabric of her dress. It was the same cornflower blue gown she'd worn that first night, but altered now, professionally fitted and mended with careful invisible stitches. Isolde had helped her, using some kind of vampire magic to restore the beading and repair the worn spots until the dress looked new again. Or rather, until it looked like what it had always been meant to be. Beautiful and full of history, Charlotte's dress remade into something that belonged to Eleanor now. "You look stunning," Gideon said from the doorway. He was in a tuxedo again, his white hair tied back, and Eleanor's heart still skipped when she looked at him. "I wanted to wear it again," Eleanor said, "to show everyone that I'm not ashamed, that this dress, Charlotte's dress, is part of my story." "They already know that," Gideon said, moving to stand behind her. His hands settled on her waist, his reflection meeting hers in the mirror. "You've become something of a legend in our community, you know. The human woman who won the heart of the most stubborn vampire on the East Coast." Eleanor laughed. "Is that what they're saying?" "Among other things." Gideon kissed her temple. "Are you ready? To face a ballroom full of vampires again? Sure, why not?" Eleanor turned in his arms. "What's the worst that could happen? Don't say that. You'll jinx us." They walked to the ballroom together, and this time, when they entered, Eleanor held her head high. She wasn't the uncertain girl in the borrowed dress anymore. She was Gideon Xanthos's partner, accepted by his household and grudgingly respected by most of the other houses. And when Gideon led her onto the dance floor, when he swept her into a waltz while the entire ballroom watched, Eleanor felt nothing but joy. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon murmured. "About how different tonight is from last year," Eleanor said. "How scared I was then, how sure I didn't belong. And now? Now I know I belong exactly where I am." Eleanor looked up at him, this beautiful, impossible man who'd chosen her. "Right here, with you." Gideon's smile was radiant. "Forever?" "Forever," Eleanor promised. 2 years after the masquerade, Eleanor stood in a private room off the estate's grand hall, looking at herself in the mirror one last time. Her reflection looked the same as always: brown hair, brown eyes, ordinary features. But after tonight, nothing would be ordinary ever again. "You're sure?" Isolde asked, standing beside her. "There's no going back once it's done." "I'm sure," Eleanor said. She was 28. She'd been with Gideon for 2 years, long enough to be certain this was what she wanted, long enough to understand what she was choosing. "I've never been more sure of anything." Isolde squeezed her hand. "Then let's do this." The turning ceremony was private, attended only by Gideon and his closest household. Eleanor lay on a chaise in Gideon's study, her heart pounding as he knelt beside her. "It will hurt," he warned, not for the first time. "Quite a lot. But I'll be with you through all of it." "I know." Eleanor reached up, cupping his face. "I trust you." Gideon leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Then he moved to her throat, and Eleanor felt his fangs pierce her skin. It did hurt. It hurt more than anything she'd ever experienced, a burning agony that spread from the bite through her entire body. She tried not to scream, biting her lip until she tasted blood. Then Gideon's wrist was at her mouth, and his voice was in her ear. "Drink, love. You have to drink." The taste of his blood was copper and strange, but Eleanor drank because he asked her to, because she trusted him. And as she drank, the pain began to change, to shift into something else: heat and power and transformation. Eleanor's eyes rolled back, and the world went dark. She woke 3 days later in Gideon's bed, with him sitting vigil beside her. The first thing she noticed was how sharp everything was. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could hear conversations happening floors below, could smell the roses in the garden outside. "Gideon?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I'm here." He took her hand, and she could feel his relief like a physical thing. "How do you feel?" Eleanor sat up slowly, cataloging the changes. Her body felt different, stronger, like she was made of steel instead of flesh. Her senses were overwhelming, information flooding in from every direction. And she was so thirsty. She started. "I know." Gideon offered her a crystal glass filled with dark liquid. "Drink slowly." The blood tasted better than anything Eleanor had ever consumed. She drained the glass in seconds, then looked at Gideon with wide eyes. "Is it always like that?" "You'll get used to it," he said, smiling. "The intensity fades after the first few weeks." Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were pale now, the same luminous white as Gideon's, with neat oval nails. "I'm really a vampire." "You're really a vampire," Gideon confirmed. "Welcome to eternity, my love." Eleanor launched herself at him, kissing him fiercely. Gideon caught her, holding her close, and they stayed like that for a long time. 1 year later, the estate hosted its annual autumn masquerade again, and Eleanor walked into the ballroom wearing Charlotte's blue dress for the 3rd time. But this time, everything was different. She wasn't nervous, wasn't afraid of the stares or the whispers. She was one of them now, a vampire, Gideon's partner in every sense of the word. The ballroom was full of familiar faces: Isolde and Marcus dancing in a corner, Lucian deep in conversation with a representative from another house, Therne standing guard by the door out of habit even though Eleanor didn't need protection anymore, and Gideon moving through the crowd toward her with that same focused intensity he'd had the first night, like she was the only person in the room worth looking at. "You wore the dress," he said when he reached her. "I wanted to honor her," Eleanor said. "Charlotte. She would have loved this, all of it, the romance, the drama, the impossible love story." She would have loved you, Gideon said, for being brave enough to choose this life. Eleanor took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Do you ever regret it? Inviting me that first night, even though you knew it would complicate everything? Never, Gideon said without hesitation. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 200 years, Eleanor. The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner. They danced, swaying to the orchestra's music, and Eleanor looked around the ballroom with new eyes. This was her home now. These vampires were her community, her family, and the man holding her was her partner for eternity. What are you smiling about? Gideon asked. I'm just happy, Eleanor said simply. Is that allowed? It's required, Gideon said, and spun her under the chandeliers while the whole ballroom watched and approved. Outside, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the estate's grounds. Inside, Eleanor and Gideon danced, two beings with forever stretched out before them, holding each other like they'd never let go. And they never did. In the years that followed, Eleanor became a pillar of the vampire community in her own right. She used her skills from the library to help other houses catalog their histories, and she became known as a mediator, someone who could bridge the gap between old traditions and new ideas. She and Gideon hosted the masquerade every year, and every year Eleanor wore Charlotte's blue dress, restored and cared for until it became famous in its own right. The dress that had once been mocked became a symbol, a reminder that worth wasn't determined by wealth or status, but by the courage to be exactly who you were. 50 years after that first masquerade, Eleanor stood in the library with Gideon, looking at a new addition to the archives. A photo of her and Gideon from that first night, his hand holding hers, her in the blue dress, both of them looking at each other like they'd found something miraculous. Do you remember what you said that night? Gideon asked. When I told you that you were the fairest in the room? I don't think I said anything, Eleanor said, laughing. I was too shocked. You looked at me like I'd lost my mind, Gideon said, like there was no possible way I could mean it. I couldn't imagine why you'd chosen me, Eleanor admitted, out of everyone there. Because you were real, Gideon said, the same answer he'd given 100 times over the years. Because you wore your sister's dress with pride. Because you refused to be ashamed. Because when everyone else in that ballroom was wearing a mask, you were exactly who you appeared to be. He turned to face her fully. And because the moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change everything. Did I? Eleanor asked. You did, Gideon said. You changed me, changed this house, changed the way we interact with the human world, all because you were brave enough to walk into a ballroom wearing a dress everyone mocked and hold your head high anyway. Eleanor looked at the photo, at the girl she'd been, scared and uncertain, but trying so hard to be brave. I miss her sometimes, my human self. She was softer, I think. She's still in there, Gideon said. That kindness, that strength that didn't come from being turned, that was always you. Eleanor leaned against him, and Gideon wrapped his arms around her, solid and sure and eternal. I love you, Eleanor said. I love you too, Gideon replied, for all the forevers we have left. And in the library of Valmont Estate, surrounded by centuries of history, Eleanor and Gideon stood together and looked toward a future that stretched out endlessly before them, full of possibility and love and the absolute certainty that they had found, in each other, exactly what they'd been searching for all along. Outside, the autumn masquerade was beginning again, a tradition that would continue for as long as the Xanthos line endured. But this year, Eleanor didn't need to attend. She had everything she needed right here, in this library, in Gideon's arms. And the blue dress hung in her closet, waiting for the next time she wanted to remind the world that true beauty had nothing to do with wealth or status or perfection. It had to do with courage, with love, with the willingness to be exactly who you were, no matter who was watching. Eleanor had learned that lesson wearing her sister's old dress to a vampire ball. And in doing so, she'd found not just love, but herself, and a future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The story of the girl in the blue dress became legend in vampire society. They told it to their fledglings, to their human donors, to anyone who needed reminding that worth wasn't determined by appearance or wealth, but by the strength of one's character. And every autumn, when the masquerade began, someone would invariably point to Eleanor and Gideon dancing in the center of the ballroom and say, "That's them, the vampire king who called the girl in the old dress the fairest of them all." and the woman who was brave enough to believe him. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind Eleanor had stopped believing in after Charlotte died. But Gideon had given it back to her, one dance at a time, one promise at a time, until happy endings felt not just possible but inevitable. And so Eleanor and Gideon lived, loved, and built a life that spanned centuries, proving that the best love stories weren't the ones that happened quickly or easily, but the ones that were chosen, fought for, and treasured every single day. In a world of vampires and humans, of ancient politics and modern challenges, they'd found something simple and true, each other. And that was enough. That was everything. The blue dress hung in Eleanor's closet, a reminder of where they'd started. And every year, on the anniversary of that first masquerade, Eleanor wore it again, walking into the ballroom on Gideon's arm, her head held high, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. Home. With Gideon. Forever.